To build a successful company, you need to remove yourself at some point from the day to day if your team is ever going to expand. It's called delegation. And today I'm excited to connect with my good friend Mika Moser from at Sea Level.
Hey, thanks, Tim. So happy to be here.
Excited to talk about delegation and how to remove yourself from being the epicenter as a business owner or as a leader in an organization. But before we get there, do you mind telling the folks a little bit about who you are and what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I would love to. So I am a former C-suite executive turned talent consultant, if you will. Have over 25 years of experience hiring, managing, and leading teams, doing that in the banking, technology, and nonprofit space. And I founded a company called At Sea Level, where we help companies close those leadership gaps. And we do that through executive search and professional development, and then some strategic consulting services.
So, delegation. Let's get into it. Why is delegation important?
Yes, it is extremely important because you need it in order to grow your business. And you also need it in order to preserve your own sanity, as I like to say. So there is a real cost to not delegating, in my opinion. And that cost can span anywhere from your own personal burnout and mental health because you're just doing too much. It can also impact your succession plans. So if everything is sort of with you and not being delegated or shared or taught to others behind you, they have no real opportunities to grow. And so therefore they can't step in and fill in some of your shoes while you're moving on to bigger and better. And then it actually can really install the growth of your organization because, again, everything is sort of bottlenecked with you and you're not opening yourself up for new opportunities to grow or expand the business. So it has a real cost to not delegating.
So, I definitely want to talk about the cost of not delegating, but let's first talk a little bit about the anxieties and fears that leaders in their organization. It could be I'm just using leaders as kind of like a catch-all because a lot of times when we talk about delegation, we're talking about business owners, not
Yeah.
delegating in small businesses. But the bigger the organization, right? If you're working in an organization that's got 50,000 employees, there's got to be a lot of top-down delegation from a lot
Yeah.
of folks in the rung. There's a lot of anxiety around delegating and when to delegate and how to delegate. How does one even begin to wrap their head around delegation? Like, what's the starting point?
So it's funny you say that because I think there's a couple of things that I see often, and I work mostly with, call it current and rising executives. So I'm mostly in organizations with working with leaders who are leading a large group of people. And this can all be the same for business owners. As a business owner, I struggle with a lot of this as well. But I
Sure.
tend to find like there's kind of like three major kind of fears that are popping up. The first one that I get a lot is a fear of maybe looking like you don't have it all together. And that, here I am, I've worked really hard. I know, I've been a strong performer. I get into this position because I've been great at my job. And
Mhm.
now I have to ask other people for help. And that looks like maybe I'm, don't have it all together, or maybe I'm weak in some areas. And I think a lot of people are afraid to embrace the fact that they just need help and that they can't do everything. The other thing I see is a fear, especially if you have a team underneath you, is just a fear of pushing too much work down on others. And maybe it feels a little bit like you are overburdening them or you're adding too much to their workload. I work with a lot of leaders like, I just don't want to burden them. I don't want to add anything else to their plate. And the irony is that they're kind of hungry for it. That's what they're there for, is to take kind of things off of your plate. And then the third one is I actually suffer from this because I'm a recovering perfectionist. And I think a lot of us just
Yeah.
think I can do it faster and quicker and better. So why am I going to take the time to delegate it to somebody else because they're not going to do it the way I want them to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And like for those of us that are perfectionists, we've got to sort of let that go. And I think there's some studies, and you might have heard these studies, like if you can be okay with them doing it 80% right,
Yeah.
then that means that it definitely needs to be passed down
Yeah.
to somebody else. So I think that for me is what gets in my way, is that I just have very high standards for myself in the work that I create.
Mhm.
And if I feel like the person that I delegate it to isn't going to live up to those standards, then I tend to hold it a little bit closer to the vest.
That's great. I love those 3 pillars. So let's just do a little recap on that for the listeners here. The first one being, I don't wanna present myself in some kind of way like I don't know what I'm doing. because I worked really hard to get to this leadership position. And if I start feeling like it's all going to fall apart, right? Like the curtain is going to get peeled back. So there's that anxiety of looking and presenting a certain way. The other one is, I think, honestly, somewhat of a noble cause, which is I don't want to burn out my team. They work really hard, so let me just take it off their desk and just try to manage the workflow. I see that a lot of times. It's a bit altruistic, right? Because you're looking out for other people. And then the third is the perfectionist bit, right? I can do it better myself. Just kind of get out of my way. What might take you 2 or 3 hours, I could probably do in like 20 minutes. So let me
Yeah.
just do it because it's more efficient. But going back to your original point of there's a cost to not delegating.
Mhm.
And what I've seen is you're better off spending that 2 or 3 hours with the talent, with your team member, teaching them how to do the thing painstakingly, and eventually they'll get it,
Yeah.
right? Maybe that getting it is 20%, but if you're always doing it, then you're just eating into your own time. How do you justify cost around delegation? Like how do you even begin to measure cost?
Yeah. So the way that I measure it is what is the work that's in front of you that is high impact work versus low impact work? And sort of looking at it like, what is the work that is in front of me that only I can do that it sort of aligns with my position in the organization? So if I'm a C suite executive, should I really be doing administrative type tasks?
Yes.
That
Yeah.
is a real cost to productivity and to the bottom line if we are paying you to
Mhm.
do more strategic thinking and to maybe be out in the field, instead you're focused on administrative type work. There's a real cost to the organization from that standpoint. So looking at what's on your plate and figuring out what has the most high impact, high value that I need to be doing that only I can do versus passing it down to somebody else who again is probably looking for opportunities to grow and to spend time with you, to be mentored,
Mhm.
that would be happy to do some of those maybe administrative tasks. So I look at it like that of high
Mhm.
impact, high value work that only you should be doing. And if you're not, then again, there is a real cost to the
Right.
productivity and to the bottom line.
Now, this sounds crazy. It sounds crazy, but some people don't even know what that high value impact that they add to the organization is. Or maybe they've been so inundated doing everything that
Mhm.
they don't even know how to begin to separate. Obviously, it's administrative. I've seen CEOs like make Costco runs because they were dissatisfied with the type of toilet paper that the admin bought. And I'm like, that's absolutely crazy
Yeah.
that off your desk. But beyond that, right, there's other things like there's client work, maybe there's getting into the weeds, there's finances, front office, back office, there's all these different things. What's your recommendation of someone to process what their highest value is?
I think a lot of folks struggle with this. I, again, have struggled with this, but I think it's because we have these transitions in our leadership careers where there was a point in our career where we were strong doers, strong executors.
Hmm.
And that means we are doing highly tactical work, making runs to Costco, looking at spreadsheets, updating Excel documents, printing out agreements, whatever that may be. A lot of what we've done to get to where we are today was tied to that type of work. But
Hmm.
there's a point in your career or in your leadership journey where you shift into more, I guess I call it influencer or visionary. And that type of work is very different. And I think a lot of us are uncomfortable with it because it's a different skill and it's a different muscle that we're stretching. And so that type of work is thinking work and communicating work. And so if the majority of your time is not spent thinking or communicating with others, then you're probably doing mostly hands on, administrative, doing type work. And I just think a lot of us struggle with it because it is a shift and it doesn't feel natural and it isn't what got us to where we are today. But I always tell the folks that I work with, like the majority of your time, if you're at some sort of executive position, should be spent thinking, and thinking is planning, it is reading, it is going to conferences, it is collaborating, or you should be spending the majority of your time communicating, which is explaining the vision, explaining the mission, sharing the goals, helping people set objectives, and helping them do their best work. And that is, some people don't love that type of work or it's uncomfortable. And so they naturally gravitate to Costco runs because, oh, I know how to do a Costco run.
Yes,
It's a lot easier than holding somebody
yes,
accountable.
I love it. That's so good. It's so good because spending time communicating, very important. We conceptually get that. Spending time thinking in that strategic realm, like you mentioned, self-education, going to conferences, networking. Sometimes they feel like a waste of time to the hardcore
Yeah.
tactical operator, but I think that's kind of where you start to separate the wheat from the chaff, if you will. Of there's individuals that are intellectually curious and they're
Mhm.
just always looking for ways to better themselves, and there's other individuals that are they're just better tactically,
Yeah.
and maybe they shouldn't have stuff delegating to them. Like, what is the if there was some myth busters around delegation?
First one that comes to mind is that delegation is a bad thing.
Mm,
Um, it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. And again, it kind of goes to three things I talked about is that I'm just pushing my work on somebody else. Like that is not what's going on here. We are trying to expand and create space for us to grow personally and to grow our companies.
mm,
And if we're doing all the tactical administrative work, how are you going to think about what new changes are coming down the pike? How are you going to
yes,
collaborate with another business owner, another leader, and see what they're doing differently for their customers that can add more to the bottom line or bring in more revenue? If
mm,
you're not out spending time having those conversations and seeing what's possible for your organization, then how do you grow?
yes,
And so you need to delegate in order to do that effectively. And then the other thing is like if you want your company to grow, you need a strong team of people backing you up. And if they don't know how to do anything but do Costco runs, and they're not being taught how to put any projects in place, how to handle customer problems, how to go out and sell the vision and the mission, then what happens when you want to step back from the company or if you want to go off and do some new projects, you'd have nobody to do the work that you've left behind. And so
right.
now you're kind of stuck and you're stagnant. So
Yeah. Is there any like good methodology you've seen, or maybe templates or spreadsheets or anything around succession planning? Because I think this delegation goes into, okay, I'm here at this level. There has to be someone beneath me that steps in order for me to rise, right? I can't just rise without having that replacement. What have you seen work over again? Because I know you work with much larger organizations,
yeah.
or maybe that's happening en masse, right? We have multiple departments, multiple leaders, and everyone has to have two or
Yeah.
three people beneath them. Like, what should we be
Yeah.
looking for? Yeah.
I think in larger organizations, what they're doing is their HR teams are holding people accountable to regularly have conversations about who's next in line and to identify those people and then to identify who is the next person behind those people. They're having ongoing real conversations and it's being somewhat documented and there's conversations happening regularly around that. I
Yeah.
think in maybe some of the smaller organizations where it's not so formalized, there's different frameworks. I don't know if you're familiar with EOS. They have a fun people analyzer
Yeah.
framework that's helpful for you to start to think about who gets it, who wants it, and who has the capacity for it.
Yeah.
So there's different tools like that that can help you sort of do the thought exercise. But I think at the end of the day, what everybody is doing is thinking about it. And if you're not thinking about it, then it's going to kind of catch you off guard at some point when you
Yeah.
are ready to take advantage of a new opportunity or some big, huge project comes in and you personally don't have the bandwidth to do it and your team
Right.
isn't ready to support you.
Yes, yes, that's the downside. That's what I wanted to talk, because it kind of goes back to your original idea of cost, right?
Yeah.
There's these costs. There's different types of costs as well. You had mentioned burnout. You'd mentioned costs to the business. What other types of like heavy costs do you see when someone just holds on too tight?
I mean, one of the costs that's interesting that I'm seeing is this burnout. And I know we use burnout a lot, but I think what's happening less sort of around the mental challenges of that. But what's happening, especially like at the middle level, is everybody's holding on to the doing work
Hmm.
and they're the ones that are putting out the fires, making the decisions, actually, creating documents. They're the ones doing all the work and they're running at 100 miles an hour and they are tired and they are not able to give what they need to the teams below them. And so now you've got this huge bottleneck of work for these amazing executors in your organization that are holding on to it. And the groups that coming up behind them are looking and saying, like, I don't want to be a manager. I don't want to work that hard. I don't
Right.
want to burn myself out. So
Yeah.
they're opting out of advancing. And that's a huge cost to the organization because now who's going to lead
So
behind them?
that's interesting. So you're saying if the person is holding on to too much and burning themselves out, one of these costs is actually how that reflects to the people below them, and you're not inspiring people to wanna take this new role, which could be really great for them, but they see a bad example, so you're setting a bad example in
Yeah,
theory, right?
basically. Like, yeah, who wants to work, 60 hours and be the person that can't take a vacation because everybody has to ask them the questions because
Yeah,
they're the only ones that have the keys to the kingdom. So,
that's a great point. Never thought about that, setting an example, because what should the example be? What should the good example look like?
I mean, the good example is a manager who is spending the majority of their time coaching the people under them. They're the
Yes,
people reinforcing the culture, reinforcing the why, coming up with the goals and the plans that need to happen, and then passing that on to the team to make it work, and then being a support as that work is getting done. And right now, they're doing all of that. So instead of setting the goals, setting the objectives, and passing it off to the team and letting them make it all happen, they are holding on to that work. And so they don't have the bandwidth, the mental bandwidth, the emotional bandwidth
mm,
to sit down alongside a team member and coach them through the process. Like, hey, help me understand why you made this decision instead of that decision, or tell me what your thought process is going to be to get this project together. We
yeah,
don't have the bandwidth to do those conversations. And so we're getting frustrated really quickly. We're like, you just forget it. I'll just do it myself. And
right.
then,
That's the common.
then the cycle starts. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle because Um, Einstein said, "You can't solve a problem from the same mind that created the problem." So whatever problems you're dealing with, that you kind of created your own problem. And if you're going to stay in that box, you're just going to continue on with your own problems. And I think it's so important to delegate because, I've seen very talented employees two or three rungs below the ladder. And you're never going to get that knowledge from them, or that energy or that drive or that spirit and the commitment sometimes they have just to the organization. You're never gonna pull that up if you just hold on to it all,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Or create space to
Oh,
collaborate on things like that. But if you're running at 100 miles an hour, creating that space feels overwhelming to you. And it is. I've been there. When you're working really hard, you don't have space to give to anybody else.
right. What about, so we talked about skills transferring. I feel like that's the easier one, right? We can teach anyone how to do pretty much anything, but
Hmm.
there's the knowledge transfer.
Oh,
You
yeah.
mentioned holding the vision, being the keeper of the mission, the values, all these culture items. There is a knowledge transfer, and sometimes I feel like the knowledge transfer is a little amorphous, a little
Hmm.
vague, maybe a little broad. How to think about the organization, how to think about situations is like how to think,
Hmm.
right? Versus how to do.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
how do we get there? How do we teach people how to think?
Yeah. That's a good question because it's not as easy to teach as a skill.
Yeah.
And I guess what I have found is treating our role as leaders as being good mentors and good coaches. I think we have to also just be good managers. Those are very distinct and different roles in my mind. And so if you're a coach and a mentor, like, you are not telling them how to do everything. You're asking the right questions and seeing what they're thinking about and seeing how they would approach a problem.
Mm,
So say you have like a huge customer issue, instead of you kind of coming in as the superhero and saying, this is what we're going to do, I'm going to get on the phone with them, I'm going to fix it, blah 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 blah, and going off and making that happen, which is great, and you're capable of doing that. But if you really want to teach people how to think, it's like, okay, here's the customer issue, what do you think we should do?
mm,
And asking them to give their opinion and saying, okay, well, have you thought about this, or have you thought about that? And coaching and guiding them through the thought process just to see what naturally comes up for them, or some things that maybe they have missed. But
right.
that takes time. I mean, that takes time, and that takes curiosity, and that takes, um, you know, being able to listen. And a lot of us, again, are just have a lot going on, and struggle to sort of make the space to do that.
Yeah.
So
What's your take on it being okay to fail, and how important that is in the process of delegating and passing the baton?
yeah, I mean, we all failed. None of us got to where we are today by doing it perfectly. Although some of us like to think we nailed it out of the box, but we forgot that there was a process that we all went through, and that we had all these failures in our career trajectories as well. That's what got us to where we are. I think they say, like, to be successful, you have to fail.
Mhm.
And so we don't naturally want to pass that on to the people behind us because we feel like that's going to slow us down or it's going to cause a bigger mess that we have to clean up. And so you just kind of have the courage to say, okay, I'm here if you mess up, and it's okay if you mess up. And if it's something very high stakes, I wouldn't just turn it over to somebody who you're a little bit nervous about
Right, right.
running
That's
with.
a great point.
I
That's a
wouldn't
great
necessarily do that, but I definitely would say, okay, hey, I'm going to let you run with this, but tell me how you're going to do it first.
Mhm.
And seeing what their thought process is, or how they're going to approach the situation, so you can course correct it a little bit before they're off to the races, because nobody wants to go off to the races and,
Right.
yeah, I'm going to solve this problem and then be told, okay, you did a terrible job, and
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
awful.
It brings up so many ideas. I mean, the first one is there's the notion that it is possible that it's too early to delegate,
Hmm.
right? So being mindful of timing because there has to be a right appropriate time.
Yeah.
The idea of when we teach someone via delegation, coaching, mentoring, it's we have to create space for them to fail and make mistakes, right? We can't circumvent what they're doing, otherwise the whole thing falls apart, right? And it comes back to us. So having those types of skills and techniques. What about, I guess, like the dark side of delegating when things actually do go sideways, like when someone spent 6 months training someone and then that person quits, right?
Hmm.
That's like I feel like another one of those just do it myself because I know I'm gonna stay, right?
Right.
What are these like dark sides where delegation goes wrong?
Yeah, I think delegation goes, definitely, that is, I think, something that can happen. But if we live with that fear, then we're
Yes.
already behind the eight ball. I think we have to trust the team that we have, and we have to pour into them and create a culture for them to be successful. And if they leave, then they take on all the experience and the knowledge that you taught them and see that as a good thing. But some dark sides of it too. Delegating, to your point, too fast, but doing it poorly, communicating
Oh
it.
yeah.
So I
Yes.
think what happens is when we do have a lot on our plates and we're busy and we said, I'm just going to pass this off to so and so and let them do it. It's kind of a quick email that says, hey, handle this.
Right,
They're
right,
kind of like, wait, what? Like, handle it how? And then, ask me if you have any questions. And they're like, I don't even know what questions to ask. So I think there is an art to delegating, I guess, is my point. And I think a lot of us miss that art. And so that's where the dark side starts to show up is, I tried delegating and they didn't get it and they messed it up. And then I would say, well, how did you delegate it? Did you
right,
write an
right.
email, or did you sit down and explain to them and teach them what you needed? And there's all types of scale of delegation. There's quick, easy things and tasks, and then there's more bigger projects that need a lot more thought and time and attention. And being able to identify where your task sits in sort of that scale of things.
How important would you say expectation setting is?
Oh, 100%. I mean, totally. I think that's what's missed most times. Is I think most folks miss, this is the why I'm handing it to you, because I trust you and I need you to help me with this, and you have a great skill set that's going to make this project amazing. We never explain why we're delegating it, and then we never set any expectations like, oh, I need this by next Friday, or oh, I need this in 3 months, or oh, I need to hear what your thought process is before you take off with it. We just say, here it is, and then wonder why it didn't go so well.
What does it look like when it's working? What are the KPIs or how do we measure this is working, this is going well?
Yeah, I think when it's working, I will say, just on the emotional side, you'll start to feel some trust and you won't worry about it.
Mhm.
That's when you know it's working. I think it's also working when there's a two-way line of communication between you and the person that you've delegated to. When you know what's happening with the project and you feel comfortable with how it's moving forward, then that's a good sign that it's working. And that's because you've set the right expectations. And then also, I think we need to create space to give feedback to them after the project is over. Like, that went really well. What did you think? Would you like to do more of this? So I think there's some of that also can start to sense that, oh, this is actually working, because the two-way street and the feedback is good from that whole project. And then also you'll start to find yourself creating space to do new things,
Mm,
because now
yes,
you're like, oh,
right.
I could have never spent time with this new client and brought him on board, because
Mhm.
otherwise I would have been, doing my Costco runs. We're picking on this poor CEO, but doing my Costco runs
Right.
You'll start to see like you're able to take on some new and interesting work because you're not holding on to the things that you had been holding on to for so long.
You know, meddling is a big no-no. I think from what I've seen. Can you talk a little bit about what it does to the person being trained, to the person
Oh
that's
yeah.
supposed to step in? Like, what occurs to that person? Like, how does it make that person feel? Why should a manager not meddle when they're trying to delegate?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, nobody likes to micromanage. That's that word that everybody's like, I'm not a micromanager, but yet they're constantly asking for feedback
Absolutely.
or doing red line edits. Like that's micromanaging. I think the way I kind of describe it is your job is to not tell them how, your job is to tell them why and where.
That's
And
great.
if you are
Wow.
all up in the how, then you probably are crossing some boundaries a little bit. So
Yeah.
but I do think there's like milestones and check-in points that will help you get more comfortable with it.
Mhm.
But yeah, if you're micromanaging somebody, nobody feels empowered. They're probably thinking, then you might as well do it yourself.
Right.
And so if they're thinking like, what value am I adding to this project? That's not a good feeling because everybody wants to feel like they're adding value to the work that they're doing. So that is a real cost too from meddling is that you disempower your team. They then start to not show up when you want them to show up. They
Mhm.
kind of stop sharing and collaborating with you because they're like, what's the point? And then eventually disengagement
Yeah.
kicks into high gear, and then they're probably passively looking for another job.
So it sounds like if any organization is looking to scale and grow, it must seriously take a look at how they're going to identify talent, bring them up the ranks, what succession looks like, what delegation looks like and feels like, how people can keep the mission and the vision to teach the why and teach people how to think critically so that they can free themselves up to work on things that are more high value, more high level versus small admin tasks. What am I missing on the
No,
delegation?
I mean you've nailed it. So yeah, you've really nailed it. And I think a lot of it is the work that we have to do to be comfortable. It's part of being a leader
Yeah.
is delegating and passing that down. And you will hit those thresholds in your business or in your career where you're going to have to stretch your leadership muscles, your leadership skills that requires you to be out thinking and communicating and not necessarily doing all the work.
Yeah, so it's meaningful work that you do working with these leaders and with these founders. If there's someone out there, business owner, executive, and they're wrestling with this, they're struggling with it, they know they need this, want to go deeper down the rabbit hole with you. How does someone find you, contact you, work with you? What does that look like?
Yeah, I offer all kinds of leadership development and coaching services. It's all very highly tailored because I meet people where they are. We're all in different spaces. But the best way to find me is on LinkedIn. I am easily found on LinkedIn under Mika Moser. It's my favorite way to connect. And then also just feel free to check out my website at clevel.com. That is the website. And then also you can email me to mmoser at clevel.com.
Awesome. Awesome. I will put all your contact information down below in the show notes. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, wisdom, information here. And if you're new to this, like, comment, subscribe. Thanks so much, Micah.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks so much, Tim. Appreciate it.